The clash between Oenomaus and Theokoles is one of the most talked about topics in the Spartacus series. Both were great gladiators and fierce warriors. Theokoles, also known as the Shadow of Death, was a legendary gladiator who had an undefeated record in the arena. On the other hand, Oenomaus, also known as the Doctori, was a skilled fighter and a mentor to many gladiators. This video will explore what would happen if Oenomaus, already after his prime days, were to fight Theokoles, also after his prime and retired. The Theokoles we saw in the series. Oenomaus versus Theokoles, as suggested from Oenomaus himself. What would have happened if he, instead of Crixus and Spartacus, would have to fight Theokoles? The background of the two fighters. Oenomaus was a respected and experienced doctori in the house of Bariaris. He had trained many gladiators and had fought numerous battles himself. However, after an injury sustained during a battle, Oenomaus was forced to retire as a gladiator and become a doctori. His expertise in combat and his experience in training made him a formidable opponent in the arena. Also, he was a very agile fighter and was able to analyze his mistakes in the past against Theokoles, which led to his loss against the Shadow of Death in the past. Yet, this was Oenomaus without his knowledge he has now. Imagine Oenomaus who still fought and trained day in day out and was a doctori at the same time, or just alone with his doctori knowledge. Oenomaus would be a beast. He knew many fighting styles such as the Demecheos two-sword fighting style, Murmillo, the spear, the triton, you name it. Also, even though Theokoles also saw many fighting styles throughout his gladiatorial career, his main fighting style was the two-sword style, coming in handy for Oenomaus as his specialty is exactly this style, though in the past clash between the two, Oenomaus had fought with shield and sword, and perfected the Demecheos two-sword fighting style later on. Theokoles was a legendary gladiator who had an undefeated record in the arena. He was known for his massive size and strength, and his ability to overpower his opponents with ease. Theokoles is said to have fought over 100 gladiators in the arena over his career, and not one of them having survived, the tales say. He knows surely all styles as well, but not as good as a doctori, of course. Though this is evened out by the fact that Theokoles possesses massive strength and size as well as agility, giving him the ultimate advantage, but also giving him the weakness of recklessness cause Theokoles heavily relies on his abilities of size and strength. Though he also once killed an entire village, hence the name Shadow of Death, so he is a formidable fighter even if his recklessness might cost him the fight against Oenomaus. The fight. If Oenomaus and Theokoles were to fight, it would be a battle of the two warriors, past their prime but still with a fighting spirit. Theokoles would have the advantage of size and strength, but Oenomaus would have the advantage of experience and technique. It would be a battle of two different styles, one with Theokoles using his brute force and Oenomaus using his technical skills. It is a fight of strength against technique, but Oenomaus possesses abnormal strength as well, together with his knowledge and technique, both coming in as a disadvantage for Theokoles. Theokoles would start the fight aggressively, charging towards Oenomaus, trying to overpower him with his strength. Oenomaus would stay calm and composed, using his experience to dodge Theokoles' attacks and find openings to strike. Oenomaus would try to tire Theokoles out using his footwork to move around the arena and avoid being hit by Theokoles' powerful strikes. If Oenomaus were to be hit by a powerful blow by Theokoles, it could be over fast, as Oenomaus trying to counter-strike wouldn't bother Theokoles too much, as he can sustain against stabs and many other wounds inflicted upon him, whilst opposed to Theokoles, Oenomaus would die if a heavy blow is inflicted. As the fight progresses, Theokoles would become more and more tired, whilst Oenomaus would still be fresh and alert, as he heavily relies on his agility, skill and knowledge against such a beast like Theokoles. He wouldn't charge in like a crazed goat. Oenomaus would use this opportunity to strike, landing precise blows on Theokoles, targeting weak points in his body. Theokoles would still try to overpower Oenomaus, but his strength would be fading fast. Oenomaus would likely beat the Theokoles we saw in this series, and there's a good reason towards why. Theokoles lost to a Spartacus who was yet far from his War of the Damned self, and even from his prime days in Blood and Sand, as well as a prime Crixus. Spartacus was even able to hold his ground for a little while on his own, and War of the Damned Spartacus could even take on this Theokoles in the series on a one-on-one battle. Oenomaus beat both Spartacus and Crixus in their sparring easily without even flinching or thinking too much. Therefore, I give the odds to Oenomaus in their fight. The end of the fight would come when Oenomaus lands a final blow on Theokoles, knocking him to the ground. Theokoles would struggle to get up, but his body would not respond, and he would be unable to continue fighting. Oenomaus would be declared the victor of the fight, and the crowd would cheer his victory. Then Oenomaus' dreams would have been finally fulfilled. The only reason he wanted to return to the arena was at one side to fight again, yes, as a gladiator, but also to one day face the shadow of death once again. I think if Oenomaus would have continued to fight after his injury instead of becoming Doctori, he wouldn't have as much knowledge as he had when he became Doctori. So if Oenomaus would fight Theokoles again without having been Doctori for so long, odds might still have been the same as when he lost to Theokoles, meaning Oenomaus would likely lose this fight even if Theokoles is already past his prime and retired. To conclude this, if Oenomaus already after his prime days were to fight Theokoles also after his prime, it would be a battle of two great warriors, both with their unique styles and abilities. Oenomaus would use his experience and technique to outmaneuver Theokoles, whilst Theokoles would try to overpower Oenomaus with his massive size and strength. In the end, Oenomaus would likely emerge victorious, using his knowledge of combat and his technical skills to wear down Theokoles, and his expertise in all the fighting styles to land the final blow. Theokoles may have been a legendary gladiator, but in the end, it was Oenomaus against Theokoles retired by that point, and then Oenomaus who easily beat Crixus and Spartacus in their bout, whom also killed Theokoles in the series after all, in their fight. Now this does of course not definitely mean that Oenomaus would win this fight regardless, but Oenomaus has the upper hand overall, man. If we take it realistically, Theokoles, as said, lost to Spartacus and Crixus, whom Oenomaus beat easily, even by this single point. I take Oenomaus over Theokoles, but in the arena many things can happen and can happen out of plan. Even if Oenomaus succeeds in targeting the weak points of Theokoles, it might still be that Theokoles emerges victorious by, landing a killing blow, and I would even say Oenomaus likely would fight with the two-sword fighting style against Theokoles, because that's the style he used all the time after he became Doctori, though he might revert back to sword and shield. Then of course he has a little advantage over Theokoles because Theokoles can't defend any attacks and Oenomaus is an experienced fighter, though then one thing to consider would be that Oenomaus didn't fight for long with sword and shield and most likely only fought with the two-sword fighting style as seen in his sparring with Spartacus, for example. So if Oenomaus were to sustain, of course, a single blow by Theokoles, it might be over quickly. Now, one last thing I would like to talk about would be that in the sparring bout against Crixus and Spartacus versus Oenomaus, that Spartacus and Crixus, yes, were in their way the entire time until the very end, where they both realized and Oenomaus said, "Come at me as one," and they came at him as one, as a one-man force instead of two. And the same was in the Theokoles fight, when, even in the Theokoles fight, they both were in their ways until the very end when Crixus got injured and Crixus realized that without the aid, the fight might have been lost. And the same was in the sparring bout, so we can't really say, Oenomaus bested Spartacus and Crixus only because they were in their ways, because the same was in the Theokoles fight until the very end. So putting the both sparring bout and fight against Theokoles transparent, there isn't much to argue about at that point, because it's about the same. They come in their ways, and then they fight as one. This was my video about Oenomaus versus Theokoles. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you enjoyed